Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on generational differences. I have the pleasure of introducing my two co-speakers, Dr. Regan and Dr. Byers. For the last few years, I've had the pleasure of working with both of these amazing leaders. Sadly, Dr. Byers recently retired after many years of faithful service to the district. And so we are really glad that we were able to get her to come back and to present the amazing information that she has talking about the boomer generations. So I will let each person introduce themselves and then we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Nikki Regan, and so I work in human resources with Robbie, and I do the recruitment and then hire for special programs.
I'm Nana Kay. That should say it all. I said I traded in Dr. Byers, the elementary supervisor for HR, for being a grandmother to a 5-year-old who lives in Oregon. So we're traveling and enjoying, I said, coffee on the deck in the morning when I know all of you are up getting ready and doing various things like that. I think about you as I'm on the second cup. But anyway, lots of things to do. You just trade one job for a lot of various other jobs. But I'm thrilled to be here because I love working with these people for years. And it's just been, I miss them terribly. I miss all my teammates terribly, but it's good to be here. Good.
And I am Robbie Seibert. I'm the Director of Employee Relations and Personnel here at Lincoln Public Schools, which means I get the pleasure of working with the amazing group of people in HR, and I work with negotiations and employee relations issues across the district. Yes, I can. Hold on one second.
Get your classroom voice on.
Right? Is that better? Okay, great. Now everyone can hear me. We have a video here that we'd like to start off with, just talking about generational differences, and then we'll get started from there.
Yeah, come on. Great. Hi.
Oh, thank you.
Millennial. Gen X. Boomer.
So now we want to do a little fun exercise that's going to get everyone moving in the room. You can see the years that are outlined up there, and so we want to see who we have in the audience. So if there are any boomers in the room, we would ask that you please stand up.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. If there's anyone in Generation X in the room, please stand up.
Yay.
A few
small.
fewer number of people. All right, millennials, Generation Y, please stand up. Okay.
All right.
Perfect.
Good.
We want to briefly outline that there are two other generations, the traditionalists, which came before the boomers, and Generation Z, which come after the millennials. Generation Z is just turning 18, and so they're not quite in the workforce, but they're really close. And then the traditionalists are predominantly out of the workforce now. So that's something to keep in mind, that we're talking about 5 generations that are currently there. But in the workforce, these 3 that we're predominantly going to cover are the ones that we're dealing with on an everyday basis in the workforce. So without further ado, we're going to start with a brief outline for each of the generations, and we'll start with the boomers.
And being one of those, our generation ushered in a large amount. It was a knowledge explosion. The traditionalists began it, but we really capitalized on it. We were also called the love generation. We were the ones where the pill came about, and which really provided a lot of sexual freedom for our generation. We're also the generation that was influenced by war, by the Vietnamese War, which was a non-accepted war. And we've read about that, how many of the veterans were not accepted when they came home. But it was a war that was fought not only there, but here on our own campuses. And I remember being a part of that in Illinois when you did sit-ins and all of that. So we were influenced by that. Civil rights, assassinations of President Kennedy was the first, really the loss of innocence for our country, and it really impacted many of us. And we all remember where we were for certain assassinations or certain events. And I remember where I was when Kennedy was assassinated. Even though young, you remembered those kinds of things. Vaccinations came about, polio, et cetera. So freedom from certain diseases that we were known for. Divorce was big. 1 out of 2 marriages of the boomer generation ended in divorce, which created Gen X being the latchkey children. And Dr. Egan will talk more about that. Known for rejecting or redefining traditional values, much to the chagrin and dismay of our parents oftentimes, but much more freedom allowed, much more determination, self-destiny, not just following in parents. We're also the generation and the last generation thus far that actually had it better than our parents. Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X have not and will not probably have it better than the parents. So our generation truly did have financial freedom and much more affluence than our parents and like no other generation thus. We're only about 15% of the population now in the workforce. We're the graying generation, well, except if you got a good hairdresser. And we peaked in 2000, so we've pooped now. We're on our way out. Okay.
Good. Okay, well, Gen Xers. So we were considered the bridge generation, and that is we're bridging between 2 very large generations, and we're in between the boomers, of the citizens, the senior citizens of baby boomers, and then the teenage millennials, and so we're right between that. Obviously, we were born at the end of the baby boom, so they considered us baby busters. We were a smaller generation, and as many children at that time, as Kay mentioned, the pill was becoming very popular, and then and that was in the 60s, and then in the 70s is when we had abortion that was legalized. So they think that might be indicators in regards to our generation being as small as it was. Around, I think the boomers were around 80 million, and then the millennials were about 72 million, and then we were about 46 million. So you can see where the change is and the difference of that generation. So even though we're the smallest generation by number, we're the largest in workforce. So we're about 40% of Gen Xers represent the workforce today. We are influenced by, as we mentioned, the high divorce rate. Kay alluded to the latchkey kids. And so they talking about that, and is my sound okay? Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of echoing here. Latchkey kids, and so we're left alone. And being left alone at home, then they start with we have the Nation at Risk that came out in regards to our wild generation of not being supervised and causing problems when it came to school. We are children of workaholics is what they alluded to, and that would be, could be a part of what came into the Nation at Risk. We are educated in open classrooms. Any of the Gen Xers here, did you have an open classroom? Okay, good. Yes, and so with that also, we are the best educated in education. So we went to college, and that was important. And 40% of us have college degrees. And with college degrees comes a lot of college debt. And so we are the highest in debt of our generation from our college, from our student loans. We are the first generation not to have it as well as our parents, as the boomers. So there were a lot of things that happened, like Enron, if you remember that, and a lot of changes in the business world. Usually boomers, they stay with one company and they retire from that company and get the gold watch. In our generation, we started seeing that was no longer the case. There were layoffs, there were changes, there were shifts. And so we started developing a lack of trust in regards to that. So not a smooth transition into adulthood, more of a survival, work hard so you can play hard. Some of us are considered slackers, I guess, because we did change jobs, but that could be a part of we're just trying to find, just for survival, of finding the best job to support ourselves.
Millennials. Because of the environmentally conscious nature that many of us have, we're the largest commuter generation. I always like to start on a positive before I get into some of the realistic attributes of my generation. The next one talks about us being raised by the boomers as well as Generation X. And that's really important for everyone in the room to realize why we are the way we are, is how we were raised. And so when you think about, you've heard the term helicopter parents. at many schools, that's a term, and just how we're constantly given feedback. We're constantly told you can do whatever you want to do. There are no barriers for you. We are told that it does not matter what the issue is. It doesn't matter what place you're in, you get a trophy, you matter. And then when you get into the real world, it's a little different. You're no longer under the comforts of mom and dad telling you that it doesn't matter, you can do it. And reality hits. And unfortunately, there are times when it poses a challenge. And you'll hear terms like millennials are entitled. They don't want to put the work in. Well, when you're told from birth that you can do anything and it doesn't matter what you do, it kind of gives you the realization that, oh, well, maybe there are reasons as to why it's there, and maybe we need to look at what motivates a millennial in terms of allowing them to be productive. For instance, purpose is a huge thing for millennials. We really care about making a difference. And so in the workplace, whenever there are issues that are arising, always tying that, especially with appraisal, to purpose and the great work that's being done, because that's what brings us satisfaction. Dollars and cents, benefits don't bring us satisfaction. That's not what motivates us. Just like the Generation X, the loyalty that the boomers exhibited, that's not with us. There's some stuff that will go on. When things start going poorly, we have no problem going to another job, going to another place, because we get satisfaction from the purpose that's being communicated to us. And so the loyalty that you once expected from previous generations is not there, but in a sense it is, it just looks a little different, and we'll talk about that as we go. The technology piece, digital thinkers, for the majority of the millennials, we've had internet for the majority of our life from 10 years plus. So it's not like Generation Z that they've only known technology, but we've had it for at least half of our time here. And so we're able to adapt pretty quickly with changes that have come on. So when you hear these things and you hear this, Facebook this, or Instagram that, and things that go on that traditionally aren't seen as the norm, we either have heard about it or we can easily research it and become accustomed just because that's what we had to do. And then the last 2 points, which I think are really important, Generation Z will represent 44% of the workforce by 2020. And then by 2025, we will constitute 75% of the global workforce. We are a really large group that is going to be around for a large amount of years. And if you look at the research with corporate America, generally companies are about 10 years behind. They lag in terms of catering to the next generation's needs. And public sector is actually 15 to 20 years back. It takes us a little bit longer. And that's something that as millennials start getting into positions of authority, that's what they're thinking about, that's what they're motivated about. And so changing the dynamics of policies and procedures that cater to the needs of millennials is something that corporate America is just starting to think about, given that millennials have been in the workforce now for at least 10 years. So it's just something to keep in mind. Next, we have a video which presents a humorous attempt on all three of the generations as to some of the things that you think about when it comes to communication and managing different generations.
Here's my group. This is Generation X, 45 million people in the U.S. Tend to be the most cynical, unhappy, unpleasant, and unlikable people.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that funny little video. Next, we have a number of topics, and we wanted to approach it by generation to see how they handled that. So we wanted to start with career goals.
And for the boomers, building a stellar career was your identity. Who you are in a job, who you were in a job was most important. So building that stellar career, that was the way to go.
Gen Xers, work hard so that you can enjoy your life and have that balance. But as we mentioned before, you don't have to stay at one spot to get there, but wherever you go, that you do work hard.
For millennials, it says build parallel careers, but it's really more skill sets. That's what we're coming up with, a set of skills that we can apply in almost any area. We don't like to be boxed in. We don't like to be told you can only do this. We like the flexibility associated with having a certain set of skills that can apply in many different generations.
For work style for baby boomers, ours was to work very hard at one job. And I know, I stayed 40 years in Lincoln Public Schools. But it was very important. That defined who you were, strong work ethic. Oftentimes, we were the ones that arrived early and stayed later. I noticed that even with myself, I would be there at 6 or 6:30 talking with the custodians, and everybody else would be gone. It's like, why? Well, seat time was important to baby boomers, and that was to get things done, to make sure that you build that stellar career. We're overachievers, very independent, couldn't tell us exactly what to do, all about our career and what we could do to be successful because that defined who we were.
Gen Xers like to work independently. So give us a project and we will do it. Just don't, give us too many parameters of how to do it, that we like to think of that on our own. Instead of being loyal to the company, we're committed to our work and the people we work with, but we also know that change in jobs is necessary.
Millennials like to multitask. We've been doing that since we were young in different clubs and sports and different activities that our parents worked tremendously hard in order to provide for us, allowing us multiple avenues in order to succeed. Didn't matter if we were good at it or not, it's just we were able to participate. And that then we'd have the feedback from our parents that you're doing great and you have the trophy or the medal to prove it. And so we're also very technologically savvy, kind of like the first video talked about. We like to Facebook, we like to have social media during the day and keeping in contact because that's how we interact. It presents problems building deep, meaningful relationships because sometimes some of us have problems with small talk, with developing meaningful conversations just because the anonymity of social media, and that's something that we constantly are on, presents challenges. But it's something that we collaborate well with team members as long as there's a structure, as long as there's good supervision that looks a little bit different than how Xers or boomers were managed.
Our communication preference for boomers is face-to-face. We'll email, we'll text, we'll talk on the phone, but I know for myself, I would much rather get up out of my office and go to somebody else's office or meet with them personally to talk face-to-face because we read body language and we read the nonverbals, and that helped define the entire direction of how things sometimes would go. And I'm going to insert something here. The last 5 to 7 years of my career in hiring the millennials, I not only had the millennials in my office, I had their parents. So I would be talking with them, but I would also know that I would be communicating with my generation or Dr. Regan's generation who wanted a little bit of that face-to-face, or is my child going to be okay with you? And they needed to read that.
We were direct and we want to be to the point, so just give us what you need to say, give us the message. We like email and voicemail, and we really prefer the texting because you're really direct. There's only so much you can put in a text. So quick and to the point, that's it.
I think millennials are also quick and to the point. We like instant messaging, we like texting, we like the little feeds that you can instantly get a hold of someone, because growing up you could instantly get a hold of people because technology was a little different. And making sure that you're staying positive with that communication. Condescension, sarcasm sometimes doesn't go over well and it can be seen as criticism. And so how that's framed is really important with millennials.
For technology, it replaces human interaction, which is against the grain for baby boomers. We'll do it, but we're often called digital immigrants. We'll learn it, sort of, and we'll use it as long as we have a tech department back there to help us, which I don't have anymore. And I'm finding myself going, oh my gosh, where's John? So, all right.
We're more of the digital natives. We came from the tipping point of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and the boom of technology. And so we're enjoying that part with them. And so we also came from the MTV generation. So we enjoy that media piece. And we are willing to embrace what comes next, but we're enjoying the boomers that have created that technology for us.
We get it.
Enough said. Cultural preferences and values. We've talked about it. We view the value of the person through the work that they do, through the relationships that they have, and through the democratic approach. That's been very important to our generation, to be very involved, to be part of the decision making, and to be as inclusive as we can be. But we struggle at times with the styles of other generation, and part of that's just, I think, just generational as we all get older, looking at a different generation. But seeing how others work is sometimes a little hard because it's so different than the way we were brought up and the way we made our mark.
And again, just Gen Xers being independent, wanting to, preferring to work on our own. We like to challenge the status quo, and we are not into that loyalty piece. So kind of that anti-authority might be sensed in that way. Cynical in that lack of trust of organizations and just taking care of ourselves.
Millennials are very community-oriented. Diversity matters to us, inclusion matters to us. That's not something that's just lip service. We're not joiners, and we expect great customer service because we've always had it. Amazon has been around for a number of years. There are things that sometimes we're called the microwave generation just because we have information and things at our fingertips pretty quickly. Prime, 2-day delivery, that's something that many of us have had for many years. And so looking at all of that, and then you get to the social conservatism, and really we're a lot more liberal when it comes to social issues, and that really ties more to the purpose and the inclusion and diversity of things, and that's the way that we were raised. One thing probably we should have said at the very beginning is there are anomalies in each generation. These are more generalities that apply to a lot of number of people. So you'll find differences even amongst the generation, but I think as a whole you'll see that many of these things are true.
Something else that Robbie, we talk about too is many of you may belong to various organizations, and you hear your organizations talking more and more about we need to get more members, we need to get more members, it's dying out or they're declining. Churches are experiencing many of the same kinds of things. And that's because millennials do not join with the same commitment long term. It's short projects, but not the long term that boomers have. We tend to be optimistic. We believe that people can do, if you work hard enough, you can do. We're competitive. And that will show quite a bit because we want to be in on the decisions. We also focus on our accomplishments. We want people to know what we accomplished. So that's been very, very important to us. Committed to the organization, we've talked about that.
So I mentioned about the loyalty piece, but we also are loyal into our work, so we're committed to our work, and we also want that work-life balance, and so that loyalty goes to our family and to our talent of what we do in the workforce. We also like to have fun. And so our generation, we were raised on John Hughes films. Do you remember who John Hughes is? Do you remember all the films that in the 80s? Anyone? So Breakfast Club, Sweet 16 Candles, what else? Pretty in Pink, St. Elmo's. Yes, so I think National Lampoon's Family Vacation. So we do have a fun part of us.
As we've talked about already, we're very team-oriented and we work really well in groups. We do not understand or particularly like hierarchy. We didn't have that growing up. We had an equal seat at the table up until we left our household. There are some things that it's really just best to read. If you feel powerless to make a difference, they will leave. If they feel no reason to make a difference, they will leave. They're turned off if their ideas are dismissed, what's in it for me, wanting structure, and if there's a problem in the workforce, they leave. You hear that and it's kind of dismaying. But in some cases, knowing the strength that purpose matters, that showing value matters, those are things that organizations and businesses have to communicate in order to attract and retain millennials. That's something that's really important to us as a generation. And it looks a little bit different than it has in the past. And so there's a lot of discussion about what that truly means, work-life balance. And in some organizations, it's really challenging. For instance, at LPS, we couldn't give a teacher the ability to stay home because their kids would come to school and they need to be with the students. And so it would present a challenge in order the traditional model to provide that in a way that other organizations remotely could work. And so it's finding out whatever that is in your niche, whatever community you're serving, in order to make it work.
Makes me wonder if that's why we also see a decline in the number of people going into teaching, because teaching is bell to bell. You have to be there. You can't work remotely. The kids are there. Well, you could, but it'd be a disaster on somebody, so, okay. Workplace strengths for boomers. Team perspective, very important. Loved working with this team. Miss them terribly. So, dedicated, very dedicated. Work the long hours. Experience and knowledge, very important to boomers, to prove you're smart, to know what you're talking about, make sure your facts are right, and share those because you want to give that information. That's part of that knowledge explosion that came along with the generations. Service-oriented. A lot of us went into service organizations, teaching, all kinds of nonprofit. That was very important, and we're very loyal.
Independent, adaptable, techno-literate, willing to challenge the status quo. So do what you need to do and ask for forgiveness later.
Optimistic, ability to multitask, work well in teams, technologically savvy, usually very positive and have high energy. And I think that the biggest thing, risk takers, of course, realizing that they don't have anything to lose because there's not much that they have at the current moment. We're not in the jobs that are paying what the boomers and many of the Generation X are as a whole. And so we're able to say, well, yeah, let's go do this, and I don't care how it affects the company because I'm not heavily invested in the company yet or the organization yet. And so they're much more willing to take risks, or so we think. We next have a video which kind of shows just, even though there are differences, there are a lot of similarities too. And with that, it actually looks like we are about out of time, and we wanted to provide a little bit of time for you all to ask some questions or hear about any comments that you'd have. So we will open up the floor.